You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamma Mia podcast.
This episode of The Undone is brought to you by CommBank, helping women become financially independent and resilient.
All grown up now, I think I'm ready to move on now.
Hello, you're listening to The Undone, a podcast about people in their 20s, hosted by two people who are coming undone.
We are quite undone. I'm Lucy. I work here at Mamma Mia as a production manager and I'm 25.
I'm Emily. I'm 24. Wink, wink. I work here at Mamma Mia as well in the social media team.
Emily's only 24 for like a couple more weeks.
It's like a whole month.
So I'm just letting her enjoy that until she also joins me in the mid-20s.
It's not going to happen.
Today on the show, we are chatting to Stacey June. She's a founder of Self Care Club, the Thinker Girls podcast, Stacey June Show, and she's also an author. Her new book is called Single Pringle. And then for Dating Diary, we're speaking to someone who has the worst breakup story we might have ever heard.
It includes the ocean.
Yeah, it's like literally in the middle of the ocean. But today we wanted to start by just briefly touching on this video that you might have seen about consent. Have you seen it, Emily?
No, not yet. I'm actively avoiding it because it's making a lot of people angry.
Yeah, basically it's the government's newest, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a campaign about consent, basically a video series where they use milkshakes and all kinds of things.
Yeah,
but
stop right there. I'm done.
It's not good, right? But it reminded me of the consent talk that I had at school. And we just wanted to debrief quickly.
You went to a Catholic school, didn't you?
Well, I went to, look, it was a religious school for a few years there. And I'd actually blocked it out from my memory, but our producer and I went to the same school and we were chatting about this and then she jogged this like, I've obviously just archived this really deep back, suppress. But basically it was like this ex-professional football player video, already bad. Teaching girls
the leaders of consent.
Yeah, the spokespeople. But he was a born-again Christian, so he'd like lived this life of sinning, right?
Most footballers do that, don't they?
Yeah.
They like play football, then they do something horribly wrong and then they're born-again Christians.
And it's all good now. They're good people. But basically the analogy was that women are pretty flowers and we've got these petals, right?
That's nice.
Yeah, I'm like, so true. I am a pretty flower. And then the general gist was like, look, every time you have sex with someone, imagine that you're giving a petal away. And when you get to your partner, like this ultimate destination, you want to be able to present them with a full pretty flower, not like a sad stalk with all the petals ripped off. Do you have any petals left? Do we have any petals left?
My partner's getting like a twig with maybe some thorns.
Like maybe a log.
Maybe a log, like a piece of bark from a tree.
The leaf. Anyway, this is just a little reminder that you have unlimited petals.
Everyone has unlimited petals.
Yeah, it's bullshit. And honestly, like, just get it. Just do whatever you want to do. If you want to be a full flower with all your petals and give someone an untouchable, that's your choice too. But just know that it is your choice. For the big issue today, we are talking to Stacey June. You might know her from the Thinker Girls podcast, maybe the Stacey June Show, and now she's bringing out her first book, Single Pringle, all about learning to flourish on your own and to stop wishing away your single life. Thank you so much for chatting to us today, Stacey. Can you explain what happened in your life that led you to write Single Pringle?
Oh, just being single. And being single, I must say, for a really long time was, I guess, one front. But then the other was I didn't feel like I had a book that gave me all of the tools that I learned on the fly myself through my own self-development journey. And when I say self-development, I mean that it was really specific around being more comfortable on my own. Originally, it wasn't like, I want to get to know myself. And I was really passionate about going, hang on a second, why is it so hard for me to be by myself? Why do I try and fill every moment of my life with external something? And why am I so focused on meeting someone else when I literally just came out of an 8-year relationship that I was miserable in for the majority of the time? So it didn't make sense that my day-to-day response was just so completely disconnected to what my experience was prior. So I really went on a bit of a mission to get more comfortable and to correct that, because I felt like a lot of those feelings came from social conditioning, my family narrative, potentially lineage of past people way before me and went, I want to wipe my slate clean and make my own experience, and I don't want to wish this time away. It's just such a waste of my time to be every morning waking up thinking about someone I have never effing met.
That's so true. And you say like that period, like what was that period for you? Was it early 20s? Was it mid 20s? Like how long was that period of being single?
Well, as cliche as it is, my Saturn return was when I had my breakup, changed my career, moved states. Like I don't muck around. So if I'm going to have a Saturn return, and for the listeners that aren't aware of that, around the age of 28, every kind of 28-ish years, Saturn, the planet, enters our birth kind of area, I suppose, astrologically, and really shakes things up. It's like a rebirth in some ways. So most of us go through some form of either dramatic change or we lock in officially what we're in, if that makes sense. So maybe you'll get engaged or something like that. A lot of people have breakups. A lot of people say, okay, I'm going to go travel overseas. A lot of people change their jobs. It's, it's quite dramatic. I did everything. So yeah, I had my big breakup, I think around 27, and then was single and for like a while into my early 30s.
Okay, cool.
In the book, you talk about the notion of being alone without being lonely. For single people, do you have any tips on what you can do when you feel like you're about to slip into that lonely period?
Well, to clarify that particular part, it's kind of complex, so you'll have to stay with me. And if you guys have read it, which it sounds like you have, which is very impressive, like that you've, it is complicated. But the idea that we often, now let me try and get this right because I did write it, but it gets a bit wordy. The idea that we are automatically lonely because we're alone, and that we're automatically alone when we're lonely, is a real messed up way of looking at things. Does that make sense? So when you're lonely, often when someone says, I feel lonely, the stereotypical thought process is you're by yourself. And then when you're alone, you automatically or often you think that you may be lonely if you're by yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if we put these on the head and think about it, I felt the loneliest I've ever felt at nightclubs with 200 people dancing around me with no space. That's far from being alone. And I felt the loneliest I could lying next to a partner that I knew wasn't for me. So we have to start to kind of shake up these ideas and stop really getting complacent with living on these stereotypes and these ideas that we're fed, and start to create a little bit more or a lot more understanding around what our own experience is, what our honest experience is, and deal with that.
So true. You talk in the book about, and it's something that comes up a lot in conversation with single people, and it's like you tend to have this list of qualities you're looking for in a partner, but you were writing that you hadn't quite discovered what that list was about yourself as well. So do you think that those two lists need to be complementary, and can it actually be helpful to kind of sit down and write out those things for yourself and what you're really looking for in someone and also in yourself?
This was the first, offering I did after the Thinker Girls that was around my own version of self-development, right? So I did a single Pringle values workshop, which is still available on my website, which is literally about how to make a values list, because you absolutely need to have a clear idea of what you're looking for. Two things on that though. Values, not types, which is again what the workshop goes into. And in the book, there's a whole chapter on it. The idea that we are completely driven about finding this type of person, but a type is certainly something that doesn't make us feel anything. It's all very surface level, right? He looks this way, she looks that way, they look that way, they work in this industry, all these kinds of surface stuff, when actually a lot of the time if we're working with manifestation principles or looking to attract something in instead of hunting it, it's never going to really work if we're in our minds. This is a matter of the heart, right? So we have to feel. So thinking about what you want as opposed to feeling what you want are two very different things. And in my experience, feeling them is much more effective. And that means that you need to be in a values headspace, or a values body space, I should say, not a type space. And once you start to identify what your values are, then the interesting thing is you won't know them straight away necessarily. It took me a few years to figure more about myself, which then allowed me to figure out a little bit more of what I wanted. But then a great way to check whether you're ready for that person is by, exactly as you pointed out, looking at the list of values and seeing if you feel you offer those values yourself. Because there's this real interesting thing that I've got a stereotype here that girls will often do and be like, hey, he should do this for me. I need him to be vulnerable. I need him to be ambitious, but consciously ambitious. And then you aren't vulnerable. Like, I remember thinking, I want a vulnerable man, someone that really opens up. But then I was not vulnerable, like at that time. I remember really having to work on that within myself because I thought I was vulnerable because I spoke about tampons on the radio. No, that's not vulnerable, bish. Like, you're not vulnerable. Being vulnerable is showing the parts of yourself that you're not prepared to show. And maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about tampons on the radio, but I was fine with that. So that wasn't my version of vulnerable. So at that time, I was really aspiring to this particular value-based person. Great, check. But there were so many elements on that list that I was not yet myself. So it's just a bit rich to be asking for someone to give you something when you're not yet there to give it to them.
We got a listener dilemma that I might read out to you and hopefully you can offer some advice. So she said, I've been single for quite some time and every time I go to a family event, I get hammered with questions asking why I'm not in a relationship and I can hear the pity in their voice. They just don't seem to understand that I'm happily single and a complete person without being in a relationship. But my brother is also single and older than me, but never gets questioned about being lonely. About being lonely or wanting kids. He seems to be celebrated for being single. So do you have any advice on the perfect comeback that this listener can kind of hit them with? And why do you think that there's more pressure for females to want to be or be in a relationship than men?
Because patriarchy says that we are a part of men's lives. You know, we are a team member. Behind every successful man is a woman, blah, blah, blah. So it's just, you know, it's basic bitch stuff. Like, do we even really need to go into the patriarchy? It's like, it's just history and it's, you know, not our experience living in today's world. It may still be some other people's understandings of how things work though. So my first thing is I still get angry, obviously, because I'm talking to you girls and it's appropriate and we're all in that shared, I guess, space of like, this is so boring. But realistically, we love our families or we love the people that ask us these questions, as frustrating it is. And I have found a little bit more compassion in these types of questions, and I did certainly over the years. But there was a particular auntie that would really give me this same look. Towards the end, it started to shit me. Like, I was like, it was a joke at the start, and she was also a big fan of my past boyfriend who actually wasn't a really great person to me behind the scenes. So it was like, I know that you think he was amazing, but you've got no idea what you're talking about. So that was already triggering. And then the second part was at the beginning you can kind of joke, but then after a while it just becomes a bit rude, you know. And so there's an ignorance element there. Again, you've got to find some compassion. So I guess I'm going to give 3 options to your listener because she could find, well, firstly, she could be a different person. Like, you know, I'm not sure what kind of person she is. So the first one is doing like a real crafty, almost like deflection of the question to pose another question, right? So you'd be like, I find it really interesting. Give me an auntie's name. Like, what's a classic auntie's name? Like
Patricia.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually my nana's name. Lol. That's weird. Maybe she's coming through to you. Maybe like she's here. Okay, so Auntie Patricia. Lol, that is legit my nana's name and my confirmation name, my good Catholic child. Like, anyway.
Oh my God.
No, back to the question. So the first one is posing to Auntie Patricia this idea of a question for her, which is more about, like, I would say, for example, you know what, Auntie Patricia, I find it so interesting that you're more interested in this particular part of my life than I am right now.
That's good.
That's really good.
That's one, and it opens up a conversation if you don't come across too sarcastic.
Yeah.
The second one would be more about pointing out the brother thing, so that's a bit sassy. It's like, you know, you don't ever ask blah, 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 and then they'll kind of roll their eyes if they're this person and be like, oh, there's a feminist, you know, she's just carrying on. So you may actually not get any depth with her. The last one was to just clarify this exact idea that I spoke about earlier and say, Auntie Patricia, just because I'm single and comfortable with that doesn't mean this is the way I want it to be forever. But right now, I don't want that. So I will eventually get that, but it just isn't the time for me now. And I need us to speak about something else.
Yeah, it's just establishing boundaries. It happens all the time, especially I think with like the aunties, the grandmas, the mums, because I guess they see it as like a measure of success for a young woman to be in a relationship. So I think they're really good.
Well, I think they project a little bit too. I mean, if we are talking specifically about women, I definitely had men ask me this question as well. But I think if we are talking about the women in our families asking us these questions, they weren't given, I guess, the freedom or the empowerment to feel confident in our single selves. And look, to be honest, I don't think we really are when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of it, which is why I wrote this book. I think we're often understanding we can be single and we should feel empowered, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us, I didn't. So that's why I wrote the book, because there's this idea that we should, but we don't really know how, because feminism moved us forward in that way that we should have choice. But I think often those tools behind how we didn't learn from the next generation, right? Or the generation on top of that. So we have to learn. But I guess having empathy for them, because they are projecting a little bit on their experience and not wanting you to feel, I don't know, not enough and feel like a bit of a reject, as I'm sure maybe they would have back in the day when they did it. So it can be an opportunity for education, but it's also a really lovely way for you to show some compassion for the fact that we have way more choice than maybe they did.
So good.
True. So, Stacey, where can people find you and where can we buy your book?
Well, the book is available for pre-order now, Amazon, Booktopia, blah, blah, blah. But you can find all that info on my Instagram or at staceyjune.com if you are looking for a link. And yeah, it's out in bookstores on May 4th. So look out for it there. Leave a review, do all of that juicy stuff. And I think the thing I want to say is if you are a person that isn't single, there's a couple of things. I've read this book and worked on this book when I wasn't single too. And there's been so many amazing reminders of keeping this single Pringle in myself in relationship. I just really forgot a lot of the things that I had worked so hard to create in my solo version of self, which is so important. I became a mother recently and I really needed this book. I really needed it again to remind me of that single Pringle in me, because she, as that real sparky person, was the same sparky person that's going to create independence in my life now. So if you are in a relationship and looking for some of that, there's definitely stuff in this book. And the other thing is, don't feel shy to give this book to your friend. You know, I had a girlfriend say, I've got a couple of single girls I want to gift it to, but I'm nervous about how they will take it. There is nothing wrong with being single. You do not have to apologize to someone for giving them a book about being single. Single is awesome. It's also just a relationship status. You giving your friend a single book doesn't mean they're an awful person or they're different to you. It just means that they're not in a relationship. So don't overthink it, because my girlfriend literally spoke to me about this yesterday and said, I don't know, will she take it the wrong way? And I'm like, well, firstly, it's my book, so it's very hard for me to answer this. But if I'm talking completely separate to it all, no, it's ridiculous. You're just trying to gift her something that will be helpful in this time of her life. So don't overthink it. You know, I think we kind of box ourselves off, but really it's just icing. It's just mayo. It's just a costume.
I love that.
Good.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Stacey.
much. It's been such a great
It's
conversation.
been lovely to be on your show, girls.
Anthony Chesler is the CEO of Thread Together, which helps deliver clothes to people in vulnerable circumstances like those impacted by domestic and financial abuse. And it's supported by CommBank as part of their Next Chapter program. Thank you for joining us, Anthony.
To start off, can you please explain what Thread Together actually does?
Sure. Thread Together is a registered charity that works with the fashion industry to collect brand new clothing that would otherwise go to landfill and redistributes it to hundreds of charities and registered social service agencies all around the country. So Thread Together really solves two problems with one solution. It's saving brand new clothing that would otherwise go to landfill and giving it to people who need it most all around the country.
Wow. And how did you get involved in Thread Together?
So I'm leading the team and have been for the last 2 years. And I spent the earlier part of my career helping organizations to solve problems as a management consultant. And increasingly over the last few years, I sort of lost a lot of purpose in what I was doing. solving problems that I didn't feel were actually helping people. And so I was looking for an opportunity to help people as well as do my bit for the environment. And this was just a fantastic opportunity to work with an organisation to take it from startup to scale up and to help vulnerable people in need of essential clothing, a basic human right.
Oh, that's such a wholesome story.
That's so cool.
What kind of clothing brands are involved?
We work with all different types of brands. So return to work, activewear, the types of brands that we're working with at any point in time. About 500 brands a month are donating clothing to us. They include brands like PE Nation, The Upside, Under Armour, Colours and Patty, Shona Joy, Showpo, The Iconic, Bend On. The range is
These are
just
great
endless.
brands.
Yeah. We get clothing from Tara Cash, YD, Camilla and Mark. So we helping people to access clothing where they need it most, and so that could be to return to work. So we're working with brands that are helping us to clothe people who are returning to work. So it could be trousers, corporate shoes, a tie, a shirt. It could be people that are escaping domestic violence, for example, and so they are needing just basic clothing to return. Some people may have lost their home through bushfire or the recent floods, for example. We're just trying to provide people access to clothing where they need it most.
Do you guys kind of preempt, like as you mentioned bushfires, do you preempt that it will be a surcharge of people needing clothes when those situations happen?
So we have, at any point in time, we're receiving clothing. We receive clothes every single day of the year. It's almost difficult to predict what we're going to receive. So sometimes you may have weeks where you go without receiving brand new underwear, and then you receive pallets and pallets of underwear, which lasts for a long time. So it's difficult to know what and how much you're going to receive as well. It's one of the biggest challenges that we face. Clothing comes from all around the country and from different brands. So in sort of mid-2019, we experienced some bushfires. We had a lot of organisations reach out to us to help us at that time through their generosity, so not through excess. So most of what we do is collect clothing that doesn't get sold, but a lot of our partners reach out to us to provide clothing to us. So 2019 bushfires, we received a surge of clothing from different brands. Then we had the bushfires in New Year's 2020. We then moved into the pandemic, and then we've just recently had floods. And that's on top of our typical workload. So we're working with homeless, victims of domestic violence, asylum seekers and refugees, individuals who've been incarcerated and are leaving jail, wardrobe through us. And so it's hard to predict what that surge looks like. During the pandemic, there was a campaign called We Wear Australian, where hundreds of Australian fashion brands got together and rallied each other to get through the pandemic and made clothing donations to us along the way. So we're thrilled to receive any brands from any donors that are looking to help us to clothe people in need.
Thanks, Anthony. To find out more, visit combank.com.au/next chapter.
I just had a really great date. It was so fun.
About halfway through, I realised I needed to make a rapid escape.
They just didn't show up. So I just sat there by myself.
Today on Dating Diary, we are joined by our friend and listener of the pod, Taylor, and she is here to tell us potentially the most horrific breakup story we've ever heard, and it involves being in the middle of the ocean. So do you want to start off by telling us about this relationship? How long have you been dating?
So we were dating for about 5 months at the time of this incident. It was a couple of years ago. I was a bit of a party girl, a bit of a loose cannon, and he was a very nice, sweet, sensitive boy.
Boring.
At about the 3-month mark, when we were okay, we decided to book a holiday.
That is really early to book a holiday.
Disgusting. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Don't know why anyone let me do that. So we decided to book a cruise. And
like maybe I like him more if I just spend every waking moment with him and stranded on a ship.
This cruise was not with friends. This was just us going on a cruise. And I'm not a cruiser either.
No.
I don't know what kind of came over me.
So you were 22?
I think I was 22.
Not 60 years old.
And the worst part was my 3 best friends had then booked a trip to Bali a couple weeks after.
No.
So I had already committed to this boring RSL cruise, and my 3 best friends were having a 2-week fun trip in Bali. So I was already, a bit devastated.
Yeah.
So here we are in this great, happy relationship, and I just slowly start to get the ick. And I remember chatting to like my best friends and being like, oh, like I do not like this boy.
Yeah.
What the hell am I going to do? I need to go on this cruise for 11 days by
my God.
ourselves, like stuck in like a 2 meter
In
by
the
2 meter
cabin.
cabin, like disgusting. And they're like, well, you can't like pull out. And I was like,
expensive.
well, I know, like I would have lost my money, he would have lost his money. And like this was like a week or two prior to the cruise. So I ended up going on this cruise.
No.
Went on the cruise with this boy and it was okay. Like, don't get me wrong, even though I had the ick, like we were still friends, you know? Like I still had that like baseline friendship with him. And before the cruise, every time we'd kind of get drunk, like I would do something wrong or do something to upset him and we'd always end up in a fight. So like just have that as some background knowledge. So we were on this cruise. I quickly realized there is absolutely nothing to do. So like honestly, like our day would look like we'd wake up, go to like the all-you-can-eat buffet brekkie, and he was a big gambler. I know, red flag. So like we would sit in like the pokie machine room for so long and I would just be so off it.
You were literally 85.
I was 85 at this point.
this is
I aged very quickly. And then we'd go to bingo. That was fun.
Are you kidding me?
Honestly, the bingo was so much fun.
Were you the youngest people there?
Honest to God, there was probably like another 2 or 3 people, probably under 30. Everyone else was like family with kids or like 60 plus. So there was this one night where we had this massive, massive, massive fight. Couldn't tell you what it was about. Probably my fault, but anyway. And I broke up with him. In this big fight.
In the heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment. Well, I mean, not really. I was thinking about it for a while.
Like the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah.
Were you in your cabin when you were fighting?
I think like the fight started while we were drinking and then it just like absolutely blew off in our little mini cabin.
Wait, how many days into the cruise?
This is the worst part. 4 days. 4 days into an 11-day cruise, I broke up with him. And like, you know, when you're like really hungover the next day and you kind of like wake up, but you're not fully awake and like you in your mind, it just kind of like flashes back of like all the crap you did that night before. So like, I was like semi waking up and being like, oh my God. So like I rolled over and like we both woke up and he was like, oh, like,
Oh shit, you had to sleep together?
Yeah.
Because you're sharing the same cabin?
Yes. And like it was a double bed. There was no like twin share. It was just like one bed. The room was tiny. Like there was nothing else to do. And I rolled over and he's like, oh, was that serious? Like, are we actually broken up? Yeah, we're broken up because if we're not broken up now, I'm going to have to re-break up with you in 10 days' time when we get off the boat. Like I have to stick with this decision. So I stuck with the decision. I know it definitely would have been easier to, you know, just say it's fine, we'll get back together. But no, I decided it was the end.
What the hell did you do for the rest of the trip?
Cried.
Oh no.
No, not actually. Like I was okay, and I think I kind of tried to like convince him that it was like a mutual decision. Like it was the best decision that we could make for like how incompatible we were.
Lol.
Look, it was pretty depressing. We did not look like any fun after that.
That is like the most tedious and like drawn out breakup you could imagine.
Day
I
4,
know.
not even
day
halfway.
4, like come on day 4 out of 11 days. And when we were the most hungover that next day, it was like one of the 3 stops of the boat. And we were both so sick that we did not even get off the boat. So like out of the whole trip, I think I got off the boat like once or twice to the islands. So it was literally me on a floating RSL in the middle of the ocean with my ex-boyfriend, and my love life's been a mess ever since. So
Is the moral of the story, don't book it an 11-day cruise 3 months into a relationship?
110%.
Don't go on a cruise full stop.
I mean, like,
if you're under 60 years old, just avoid cruises.
avoid cruises and avoid holidays like less than a year in. Like, absolutely not.
I may as well avoid men while we're at it.
Yeah.
Well, that's working really well for me, actually.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing that with us.
No worries, guys. At least you can laugh and cry with me.
That's all we have time for on The Undone this week. How are you feeling?
Tired.
Tired, not flourishing?
I think because we talk so much that whenever we get out of the podcast studios, because we both also have full-time jobs on Mummy, if I have to go into a meeting, I'm just so quiet.
Yeah, I'm a mute. I'm like, I can't help you.
So there you go. That's all our talking for the week.
No.
In one shot.
We've got a little bit more in us. Make sure you're listening to us on Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Tell your friends about us.
You can find us also on Instagram at Lucy M. Neville or at Emily Vernon or at the Undone podcast.
We're forming a little community there.
We're trying. Not all of you are there.
Come on, guys.
It doesn't add up. I do data analytics and I know the listens don't add up to the follows, so some of you are doing something wrong.
We're also going to do some of our anonymous confessions soon, and there's a link to that in our Instagram bios and in the show notes. So if you've got anything a little bit juicy, it doesn't even have to be too scandalous. You might just not want to have your name to a question or something like that. You can drop it in there and we'll chat about it. This episode of The Undone was produced by Emmeline Peterson and Liz Ratliff.
Bye.
Bye. This episode of The Undone was brought to you by CommBank, helping women become financially independent and resilient.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.